Hello and welcome to our education webinar on what effective CPD looks like. I am really excited to be welcoming Kat Howard. Hi Kat, how are you?
Hi, yeah, I'm good, thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course, yeah, thank you for coming on, especially in such a busy time. I know it's exam season at the minute, so it is really appreciated. And I know that you're going to have some really brilliant advice for us around professional development. But could you start first by just introducing yourself and your work in this area as well, please?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Kat Howard. I'm an Executive School Improvement Lead at Windsor Academy Trust. Part of that role is kind of taking care of a portfolio of schools, but also leading on curriculum and assessment in that space. I'm also CEO of LitDrive, which is an associate subject association, a charitable organisation, really investing in the professional development of English teachers in the UK. So we have a member-based community of over 27,000 English teachers now, all tapping into a collaborative network that aims to support teacher development for English teachers.
Brilliant. I love that. So that also explains a little pre-chat that we had where you were talking about your son and him not liking English as much. I can understand why that might be a bit of a sore subject for you after hearing that introduction. So, but that's great. So obviously you've come into this discussion with a lot of different hats then, a lot of different ways that we can look at professional development. So I'm really looking forward to this. So kind of diving into the deep end really there's quite a lot to unpick, but what would you say are the key ingredients for successful CPD, as particularly ones that are going to lead to like lasting impact? As too often we kind of have those, one-off training sessions that don't really land or really become something that gets embedded in school. So how can we get the key ingredients right for that lasting impact?
Yeah, I think we're really lucky as a sector that we've been giving professional development, design and delivery quite some thought, I think. And I think we've got a really strong collective understanding about what good doesn't look like. So that kind of, that as you described, that one-off kind of person in the hall at the front, everybody absorbs information through osmosis, and then we all go off and a multitude of different things happen. So I think if I were to kind of sum it up to maybe 5 key principles, and it's very much intertwined with, I think, just solid implementation. I think the first is being evidence informed. So I think the only way that you can ensure that professional development is going to be impactful is if it's based on a really strong evidence base, and that evidence base needs to be, that research needs to be as close to the classroom as possible in terms of working out where to place our best bets, and so that we don't end up with being our attention being drawn by educational fads or the next shiny new thing to kind of be put in front of teachers, because there's a saturation point, I think, in terms of lots of different ideas out in the sector about what works. So I think that's a good place to start. I think for schools and trusts particularly, having a shared conception of excellence. So by that I mean, do we all have a really good model for the thing that we're trying to implement through our professional developments, whether that be a particular teaching learning strategy, pedagogical tool, curriculum? What is it? How do we define it? And if I were to ask 10 people at different places across the organisation, would they describe it in the same way? And I think that's a good stress test for anybody leading teaching learning to go, okay, like what's the thing? What's the principles of the thing?
Makes it quite practical as well if you've got that clear example.
Yeah, and it's in the same way that when we were talking about, when retrieval practice became kind of in vogue and was being kind of rolled out across schools perhaps 5 to 8 years ago, there was a really mixed message around what we meant by retrieval practice and what it is and what it isn't. So that example, non-example,
absolutely.
Defining a thing is really important. I think then quite quickly sharing with colleagues the contextualization. So by that I mean, if you're presenting me with the thing that you're trying to implement, to kind of share, to roll out, very quickly you have to make it subject or phase specific, to demonstrate that you, I suppose, understand the nuances of the subject. And as an English teacher, I've been sat next to a maths colleague, and either I've been really enthusiastic about the thing, and they're like, this just wouldn't land in my classroom, or vice versa, where our subjects are completely different. And so Some of that comes through the exemplification that anybody leading teaching and learning, the different voices that they bring into that space. So using the subject-specific or the phase-specific voice, I think, is really important to contextualize those examples. I think connected to that, the opportunity to trial and share best practice as a built-in part of your professional development offer, I suppose, School or a trust. So, as I say, very quickly, as a strategic leader of teaching and learning, I would want to hand over to various different voices within my organisation who maybe aren't quite getting it right, but are trialing things and kind of share their perspective around implementation. I think we often think with professional development that we're going to deliver the thing, and then in a week's time, we can kind of walk down corridors and we can see it happening in lessons. And that kind of smacks in the face of what we know about good implementation. We know that there's a trial period where we have to get it wrong to a certain degree and test it out to ensure stronger in implementation later on. So I think saying that out loud to colleagues is actually really great for psychological safety, but also enables them to test and learn. So I think that's helpful. And then finally, I think ensuring that you view professional development as a curriculum in and of itself. So
interesting.
That idea of, if I'm introducing something in September, when we've got the cognitive load of kind of lots of other things that are being introduced in September, where am I enabling teachers and leaders to come back to that particular area of focus later on? So we don't deliver retrieval practice as a standalone session and then we never talk about it again, or perhaps we talk about it in 6 months' time. But if we consider what we know about like science of learning and how people learn, the idea of introducing something, giving people the opportunity to practice, and then bringing it back. So returning to that, revisiting content, revisiting the evidence base, seeing how much we remember, and giving people the opportunity to share how it's going in their classroom, some of the glows, some of what's working well, where they've seen real evidence of success in terms of impact, and equally so some of the grows, like what's challenging, what barriers are they coming up against, so that other people can either support with that, or we can start to identify commonality against some of those barriers. And it might be something that the strategic lead of teaching and learning wants to take away as a kind of thinking point for the leadership team. But it just ensures that staff see, okay, we're not just going to talk about this one thing and then we'll never speak of it again and it will just happen. We've got intentionality around, well, this is really valuable, and if we know that it's going to add impact in terms of learning, then it means that we need to come back to it and talk about it more than once, because we know that's how learning happens. So of course, for adult learning, the commonality is there, I suppose. So they're kind of the 5 things I think that anybody leading teaching needs to have a think about when they're delivering professional development, or in any space, actually, not just teaching and learning.
No, that makes sense. That's a really good point. And I like what you mentioned about psychological safety as well, as I think often one of the elements with things like professional development is that fear of getting things wrong, or failing, or being, so knowing they're in that safe space to try new things is really important. Lots of great strategies. Sorry, go on.
No, not at all. And adult learning, I think, is like we are the worst audience as kind of teachers of being comfortable with, like, we're meant to be the experts, right? So the idea of like there might be something that I still need to explore or develop or grapple with in my classroom is a place of discomfort. So I think acknowledging that sometimes as leaders, depending on the domain of that you're delivering professional development on, whether that's behaviour, attendance, kind of the culture piece around schools, or indeed, curriculum, teaching and learning, just saying that we are all on a continual journey of professional development is massively reassuring, I think, for teachers and professional services staff to be like, oh, okay, I don't, my job isn't to know it all. My job is just to be open to continual learning. And that in and of itself, I think, just gives people a little bit of reassurance in professional development.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So should we think differently about CPD for teachers with technology compared to how we approach CPD in other areas of learning? Or do you think we need a similar approach? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that leading professional development through LitDrive, the organisation, and equally through my work with the Teaching School Hub in the UK, where we delivered across hundreds of schools, so about 7,000 teachers were accessing our professional development. Yeah, and kind of leading that piece of work just after COVID, through COVID, and just after COVID. Really eye-opening, because I think it enabled us as a sector to start thinking slightly more creatively about how professional development looks. And I think we see lots of now diversity in terms of how you can access professional development. We have pre-recorded masterclasses. We have, a similar space to this where we're kind of sharing content online and it has a greater reach. And we also have kind of asynchronous learning and how we engage with that. So I think it brought us up to speed as a sector a little bit from just limiting ourselves to the in-house offer. I think when it comes to professional development and tech for teachers, I think we're probably slightly less tech savvy than perhaps other sectors, because it's not our bread and butter in terms of teaching. And we always look at it as, well, I always look at it as, does this enable professional learning or does it inhibit? And I think that's a good rule of thumb when we think about the role that tech plays. And there are certain aspects, again, coming back to implementation, there are certain aspects that are better delivered in person or delivered with an interactive audience where you're going to get that consultation and feedback about how things are going. Or if you're implementing through your professional development something quite significant in terms of change, that there are just aspects that the asynchronous, synchronous, in-person, virtual, or even enabling tech can either enable a better conversation, a more conducive collaborative environment, or might actually inhibit it. And I think that's where the role of tech plays a really fundamental part. I've also seen some fantastic ways around how tech to enable learning for students has therefore been transferred to the professional development space. So I attended a conference only the other week, and it was a session delivered around kind of like wisdom of the crowd. And so engaging in that, they were using tech tools like Mentimeter and, different kind of crowdsourcing technology to just show a snapshot where the crowd's thinking was. And it was quite an innovative idea in itself that was being delivered for the professional development. So it really challenged the audience's thinking. So it was great to see that response in real time, and the facilitator almost acknowledging that, there's a massive diversity of thought, and that's great. That's exactly what we want in our schools. So I think the role of tech in terms of providing that real-time audience response, or even checking for understanding and other bits like that we're already using in our classrooms, have a great place in terms of the sphere around professional development, for sure.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So those are tools that we use in the classroom, like you say, to check in on students' understanding. So why not do the same thing during CPD sessions?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And how do we measure the success of CPD? So obviously, you said one of the things that we want to do within those ingredients is make sure that we're measuring CPD. We're seeing what's working well, we're seeing where the challenges are. How do we measure, what good CPD impact looks like, and ensure that it does translate into that improved teaching and learning?
Yeah, and I think this is an area that we definitely continue to learn about in the sector. Thomas Buskey's obviously 5 principles around evaluation of professional development was a good starting point, but nobody's really dug into this space since. And I actually think that there's a lot of kind of data that already gets collected in schools that can be repurposed to measure the impact. I think sometimes we look for superficial indicators that professional development is landing well. So we do the survey just after the session, and everyone says lovely things about it. And that's just really the perception of their experience in the session, rather than the impact, kind of delayed perception or delayed reaction in terms of, how is this going to land in your classroom? Is it improving learning? So I think for kind of anybody leading professional development, they want to have a think about not just the experience of their attendees, I suppose, of their the teachers and staff engaging in the professional development, but also around the design. So, where are they getting guidance around, again, principles of learning? So where are we not cognitively overloading through the professional development design and its delivery, and bits and pieces like that? That can give us an indication. And then thinking more about the delayed perception. So data sets to kind of offer that. Obviously, student outcomes. That's what every professional development is geared to do, or student experience. So, for example, start to build up. I always work with a rule of 3 in terms of impact. Where are your 3 data sets that are coming with a different methodology in order to demonstrate or give you a little bit of an inference around success? So, for example, if I were to deliver professional development around kind of behaviour and routines in one of our schools, I would look at instant perception data. So whether, and being really clever in the questioning around, will this make a difference to your practice? And questions around that, around value, rather than did we have a lovely time? I'm going to rate it out of 10.
Very different. You can enjoy the session, but not
you have to acknowledge the dynamic. You have to acknowledge the dynamic as a leader, that everyone is going to want to tell you that everything is working all the time, and your job is to spot where it's not working and get people comfortable enough to tell you about it. So really well designed questions at that kind of point of reaction. But then I would want to take student voice at a later point, probably selecting out my students with special educational needs, or my disadvantaged students perhaps, and viewing it through that lens, because I know their learning is most vulnerable. I might take some quantitative student voice data. I might take some teacher data that's kind of delayed in terms of their perception. How is this landing in your classroom? We ran this professional development a month ago. And then I'd look at student impact data, probably in terms of behaviour related data, so sanctions and rewards. That then gives me 4 really strong data sets. They're all coming from different lenses that enables me and the strategic team to sit down and go, okay, how do we think this professional development delivered on the overall aims that we set out to do? Another really basic way of doing that with our leadership, with my leadership teams, is we sit there and say, if we were sat here in 12 months' time, what would improvement look like? What would we expect to see? And from that, we can start to think, okay, where are the data sets going? Where's the data going to come from? So that we get a sense of, well, we've said behaviour will improve, or the culture of the school be improved. We take nebulous statements like that, where we go, okay, well, what do we mean by the culture is going to improve? We start to drill down into, this is how we'll see it, this is how we'll feel it, this will how people feel. We'll start to think about staff well-being. And so we start with an aim. What does 12 months time look like? And we design the data sets that we're going to collect data around that, so that we get a sense as to, okay, well, why have we delivered this professional development? What do we want it to do? What do we want it to achieve?
Yeah, it makes sense if you have that lens from the beginning of how you're going to measure that success, that you'll then be able to do that more effectively, obviously, if you've got that from the start.
And I think it comes back to that idea of conception of excellence, that conception of quality. If we've said that's what good looks like, that really helps in us going, well, this is where we are against that measure at the moment. This is our starting point. And so you're bridging that gap between where you are now and where you want to be in 12 months' time.
Yeah, I love that. Just coming back to, obviously you mentioned those 5 principles. For anyone that doesn't know them, what were those 5 principles?
Yeah, so being evidence informed, making sure that you've got a body of evidence to be credible in order to say, we're going to do this thing, and this is why we think it'll add value to our students' learning and experience. That conception of excellence. So what does good look like? And use examples and non-examples to make that happen. Contextualization, so phase or subject specific, or context specific, depending on the type of school that you're in. So, for example, if I was looking at a curriculum in an independent school in inner city London and taking that to my schools up in Stoke, they'd probably go, I'm not quite sure how that's going to land.
Doesn't quite work the same way.
Making sure that we can contextualize that as much as possible, and the maths English argument as well. The opportunity to trial and practice and share ideas, and kind of, you may want to ensure collaboration with particular groupings, etc. And then finally, that it's part of a staged curriculum, that professional development doesn't act in silo, and it also isn't an isolated event. It's something that you come back to and in alignment with your strategic priorities.
They're very much linked to those key ingredients you mentioned, obviously, at the beginning. Those are those 5 key principles.
Yeah.
And if you could give one piece of advice to schools who are really wanting to improve their CPD approach, what would it be?
I think starting with a framework, it comes back to what I was saying before. None of us are really all that comfortable with the idea that there might be stuff that we still need to learn about. And that the
we can't always be the expert.
The greatest teachers and leaders I've worked with are those ones that go, do you know what? I'm always working at 40% of the role that I'm in because I've always got something else to learn. They are without a shadow of a doubt that you know that those individuals that are really open to learning. Now, that until that bedrock is there, that kind of that culture for learning is there, it's really difficult to ensure that professional development will land and have the impact that you want it to have. So I think related to that, it's starting like meeting people where they are, getting subject teams or phase teams to self-audit themselves against the particular area of practice that you're looking to develop. We do a lot of that work with curriculum, for example. I say a lot out loud to English teachers, just because you're teaching English doesn't mean that you've read all the books. And so I'll openly speak about gaps in my own Shakespeare teaching of texts that I have studied 20 years ago that haven't taught. And so it's smashing through some of those misconceptions to get people to a point where they're open to learning. Once you achieve that, any professional development plan and implementation later on and measuring impact is possible, but it starts with kind of open to learning conversations where everybody's talking about their strengths. So we do this through the lens of curriculum a lot. When I wrote a book called Symbiosis, Curriculum in the Classroom, and in that final chapter around teacher development, we talk about use the curriculum as a starting point and have conversations with teachers around, you know, what was your dissertation specialism, what was your master's thesis on, and having all of these conversations that just enable colleagues to learn from each other and learn about their collective strengths and areas of development as teams is a really safe place to start that conversation around, okay, so what are our areas of development collected globally across our team? What do we need to think about developing our expertise in next? And it just cultivates that culture for professional development to thrive, really.
Yeah, that sounds really powerful going at it from that direction. I love that. And there's lots of research out there on what makes CPD effective. You know, obviously, I know you've got a book. We've talked about some of those principles. What other resources would you recommend to help educators to deepen their understanding of high quality CPD?
Yeah, I delivered a session about 2 years ago now that kind of catalogued the full 20-year history.
Oh, wow.
Come out from the sector. We are really lucky in the fact that we're really rich in research in terms of
absolutely, like, maybe overwhelmingly so in some cases.
Yeah, so how do we digest that and make that really comfortable? You know, and coming back to the role of tech, the next thing that I did with that is created like digest summaries of each of those papers.
Oh, nice.
Through an AI tool to make that accessible for senior leaders. So I think I would definitely recommend the EEF guidance report around professional development and the mechanisms. I think that was groundbreaking in terms of what it was designed to do and helped school leaders to understand about how many different models there are and things they can put in front of their teachers to develop them. So I think, you know, that opened up conversations around instructional coaching and subject-specific engagement. I also, with that lens on, would encourage school leaders to go to the subject associations and have a look at what they're doing for particular subjects and primary and secondary space as well. I think, that idea of professional development, kind of a generalist approach, can only go so far, and we have to contextualize it for the subject. So that subject knowledge is something that is deeply important to me and something that I try and ensure that we protect for our colleagues to engage with as well. So I definitely give that a shout. And then I think that there's another paper by Mary Kennedy. I'm just trying to remember. I want to say it's passing it's the persistent problems of kind of teaching, but it was absolutely the persistent problems of kind of passing the practice of teaching. And she talks about about 5 persistent problems that are faced by every teacher, and how we support teachers through professional development to grapple with those problems that just never disappear. So, for example, familiarizing yourself with the curriculum is one of those 5 things. But they're the 3, I think, really good seminal tests for teachers to engage, and for teachers and leaders to engage with, if they're looking at, okay, where do I start with professional development? How do I start to define that for my school or organisation?
Yeah, no, they sound like a great 3 to kind of get started with, because like you said, there's so much, like it is very rich on research, but those 3 are just like, really nice sort of summary of some of those aspects. So I love that. So really my last thing is, if you could share one final piece of advice that you haven't shared yet that you think everyone should know on the topic, what would it be?
I think about your implementation plan. So I think that often we have a little bit of a spaghetti at the wall approach to CPD. So we throw lots of things at teachers and we see what sticks. And that makes our data, in terms of what we were talking about, impact, really noisy, because we never really know what worked and what wasn't as effective, because we're doing.
That's true. Yeah, if you're throwing everything at once, how do you know which thing made the difference?
From a workload perspective, it can be very overwhelming for the person leading professional development, because they're trying to spin so many plates. But it can also feel quite overwhelming for the teachers and professional services staff if there's lots of knowledge coming at them and not necessarily the means or kind of know-how to apply it to their own practice. So it can feel that
they're doing what correctly, or
So generally it can feel a bit noisy. So I think any advice I would give is, like, just think about, coming back to what do you want to see improve in 12 months time, and what are your top 2? I always go like, what are the 2 most important things that you want to change, and keep those things the main things. So think really carefully about implementation, so that in 12 months time you're able to look back at those 2 strategic areas that you carved out as a priority, and work really intentionally on those. So I think a huge part of anybody leading professional development in schools, or anybody engaging with their own professional development, is to ensure that it's intentional, and that we reduce the noise for teachers. So we go, we're just going to work on this one thing, or we're just going to engage with this one concept, this one idea, and we're going to do it really, really well. I'm going to master that. And at that point, we'll look back on our progress, and maybe we'll shift the focus at that time. But that would be my advice to schools thinking quite carefully about their CPD approach, making sure it's reduce the noise for teachers as much as possible.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, like you say, focusing on 2 things specifically as well just really hones that focus, because it's just too easy to have a long list of these are all the things we want to improve. But like, it's, there's always a never-ending list, isn't there? But just being really focused on those key priorities is important.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so thank you so much, Kat, for joining me. But before we finish, where can people find you online, or any books that you've written, or any upcoming projects you want to highlight? It's your space to share any of those kind of bits with the audience.
Yeah, lovely, fab. I am on X under Sesmis. It's a very, very old Twitter handle that's kind of stuck. I'm also I'm on LinkedIn, relatively active on there. I'll kind of share what I'm reading and what I'm thinking about. I write regularly on my blog, which is sesmis.wordpress.com. And as I say, I kind of wrote a book a little while ago now, about 5 years ago, just before I went into lockdown, called Stop Talking About Wellbeing, which is a pragmatic approach to teacher workload. A little bit of a combative.
Stop talking and act, I'm guessing.
but it was kind of, I came later on to teaching from the finance sector, from private sector work.
Okay, interesting.
A little bit of a journey of realization that, we work very differently and kind of quite efficiently, I think, in the private sector, because there's resource and money attached to hours of people's time. So it was kind of a bit of a response to that. And then I co-authored Symbiosis, the curriculum in the classroom, which is now being used on kind of MPQ programs with my fantastic friend Claire Hill, who is was kind of previous trust development lead at a multi-academy trust down in Kent. And we just tried to capture, I think, how all teachers should be empowered to understand what they're teaching and why they're teaching it, and how school leaders and teachers go about that piece of work, really.
Oh, I love that. Any upcoming projects or anything that you want to talk about?
Well, I have to say it out loud. I actually have to finish it, but I'm currently co-authoring a book with Professor Arlene Holmes Henderson, who is incredible, professor at the University of Durham, and we're currently writing a book on teaching rhetoric to support teachers and leaders with how they go about implementation of a kind of rhetoric tools and strategies as a curriculum within schools, really thinking about the fake news area, AI, and how that's warped, I suppose, different lenses of communication, how we empower our students to be able to engage and understand the language of manipulation and kind of, and persuasion in the world around them. So, hopefully that should be out in the autumn, fingers crossed.
Yeah, a really important topic, because, it's just, there's so much at the moment. I know it's kind of a hot topic with various things that have been kind of on the news, or, like adolescence kid series coming out and things like that. I think it's a lot of that stuff is definitely more in teachers' minds. So that sounds like it will be a really useful book.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining me. And hopefully we'll catch you soon.
Lovely, thanks.